Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Vox Vomitus, otherwise known as Word Vomit. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the Kindle Award-winning novel Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series and Pretty Ugly. Joining me today, as always, is my Vox Vomitus vixen, Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books, which includes Dibs since September and the recently released Move On Melinda. Joining us today is Jane Ward, author of In the Aftermath. Oh, welcome, Jane, to Vox Vomitus.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks. So let's have you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your recently released book.
Okay. Well, I'm Jane Ward. I'm currently living in Chicago, but I'm originally from Massachusetts. I've been writing stories since I was young. Love to do it. I was the kid in kindergarten who the teacher had to send people after when I went to the restroom because I would disappear for 20 minutes just in my little daydream mind. So I've been doing this for a long time. And for a while, though, when I graduated from college, I worked in the food industry. So I've been a caterer, I've been a private events planner, I've been a baker. Food always shows up in my books in some way or other. And I'm just really happy to be here tonight sharing this with all of you. I just wrote this third book. It's called In the Aftermath, and it's set, it begins in 2008 when the financial crisis was just beginning to dawn on all of us across the country. And we were beginning to understand how rocky our financial underpinnings were. And that sort of sets the stage for a husband and wife who own a bakery. And they are at a point in their lives where they think things are going well, but they're really not. And that's sort of where we start out.
I will say this book had a couple things that Allison really loves and I really love in a book. So Allison, you're a foodie. Do you consider yourself a foodie? So I was just like, oh, there's a lot of food bakery stuff in this. So I was like, Allison's going to love that. And then there was a hint of a mystery going on.
Yes.
And I was just like, I love a good mystery. I love a good mystery that takes place with maybe a tragic something or other happening at the ocean. Yep. People who have read my books know that that's a common thing. Those are my things. So, this book was so realistic at times. Like for me, it was a little bit panic attack inducing in a good way because I love to panic. No,
you like the panic attacks?
I don't like to panic, but I like to read books about real things and characters that are going through real things. And as somebody who owned a business in 2008 and doesn't own that business anymore, I understand and could understand completely kind of the mentality of these characters. Right. And especially, I will say, Jules, who is a little bit clueless about the real stakes of things. And I feel like that was me. Yeah. Way back then, I was like, I didn't realize the business was doing so bad. Yeah.
And the way they've set things up in their bakery is that David, the husband, has been the financial guy. She's the baker working in the back, and she's been perfectly happy for 11 years, just sort of sticking her hands in the dough and thinking about whatever she wants to think about when she's baking, and has really no idea, not only not what's going on in the bakery, but what's going on in the country around her. She's just sort of oblivious. And it's a little bit of a communications issue between the two of them too, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing to write about and mine. So it was, and I really had this sense that I wanted to take what we were reading about in the headlines at the time and bring them to life in characters. And the good thing about books is if you are feeling that panic attack feeling, you can pick it up and you can read a little bit about it.
And put it down.
Yeah. And then you can go back to it and absorb more and put it down if you need to, which is a good thing.
Exactly. It's like when it's your business, you can't do that. You just are stuck in it.
That's
That's one of the things that you handled so well, because it isn't just, oh, it's their business, because I think we've all read stories where there's this personal thing happening to this one particular person or couple or family, but there's this sense in the book early on where Jules talks to someone who's a business acquaintance, and it's like, I'm sorry, but I have to lower our order because things aren't good for us either. And that's when you start getting the sense of, okay, this is a global thing. This is impacting everyone. No one's going to get out of this unscathed. And having lived through it, we know that.
right.
To see it there, it just was so haunting and just so relatable there, because it was like, oh yeah, it's not just you. You can't just ask for help because no one's doing well right now.
Right. And those were tough years. They were, a lot of people lost their jobs, they lost their businesses, they lost their livelihoods, and they had to find, over the next few years, had to find a new way to go forward. And, out of that sort of awful time came a lot of innovative ideas. So there's this whole cyclical thing going on too, where you realize that if you've lived through these sorts of things enough, that people are innovative and they're creative and they think about ways to come through, but you don't necessarily know that when you're in the middle of it.
And I feel like we're all going through a similar thing right now.
Yep.
I have, much like probably you being in the food industry, being a baker, things like that. I've always made my living doing something that is the first thing that people cut out of their lives when money's tight. So, I went to school for theater. People don't go to the theater when there's no money for tickets. The business I owned was a comic shop and antique bookstore. The first thing people stop doing is spending $100 a week on comic books. Yeah. I've also been, a ballroom dance teacher. So it's always something that is a luxury for people, something they look forward to, but it's the first thing that always goes.
And these days, I still have a lot of people working either in the food industry, a lot of friends, or adjacent sort of tourism types of things. Yeah. And these have been really hard. Been hard 18 months plus for people who are trying to make their money from tourism and dining out and all of that. It's really difficult. So
it's hard to justify a $12 cupcake.
Yes. Yeah.
When you have to eat it in your car alone. You're like,
right. But I want to say, I really think we're talking about the dark aspect, but that's the sort of inciting incident. But this is, I think, it's a really hopeful book, and I just want to make sure that people sort of know that there is this spirit of people working through. It's not about the suicide. It's not about the inciting incident of the financial crash either. It's really about what people do in the aftermath of that. So,
hence the title.
Hence the title.
You had a great title.
Hence the title. And it's really even about families and family dynamics and having to reconsider how those go. There's a very interesting situation with the in-laws and Jules, and how sometimes a tragedy changes those dynamics, and sometimes for the better and sometimes not for the better. So was any of that drawn from any of your own personal experience, that whole in-law situation?
No. I hope none of my in-laws are watching now thinking I'm going to spill any sort of beans. But I had the best in-laws. My parents and my husband's parents got along so well. It was just kind of crazy. Wow. They went on vacations together. They just loved each other. I had the best parents and in-laws that you could possibly imagine. So none of it was taken from my life directly. I think it's just a lot of, you both write, you absorb things from other people, or what you read, or what you see, what you overhear. Might not even be people but you just overhear, or you watch dynamics, and it's just more drawing from that and
then you fill it in and go
making it all up.
Making it all.
Well, especially if you're running off to the bathroom in like first grade and kindergarten to go have your daydreams.
I know. 20 minutes later, you come out.
I was wondering, like, were you stealing the book with you? Because I was also the kid who
secret bathroom reader.
Yeah, no, because I was the kid who, so in high school we had 0 period PE, and I'm the kid who would shove the book under the shirt and stand there while the coach would take roll. And then when the coach would go back inside, everybody would go play their game and I'd sit down and be reading my book instead of running around. Like,
I never, I wasn't clever enough to figure out how to get the books out of the classroom, but I would just go and make things up. But my daughter was big. She would take books everywhere, and she was pretty clever about doing that, but not me. I was just sort of going along. I don't know.
No, I was a big daydreamer too. I still am. Like, I think that's a huge part of my writing process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my husband will just catch me like staring out the window for hours on end, and he's like, "I thought you were writing," and I'm like, I am writing.
Well, you are. You're thinking about your characters of your next book, and you're visiting with them, and you're letting them talk to you, and it just sounds a little bit out there for most people listening into us, but it's what happens.
I know. Like, I feel, I don't know what it's like for you, but I live with my characters in my head usually for many months, if not years, before I have the courage to let them come out of my fingertips.
Yep. Yeah, and I have to really know them before, and I'm sure you're the same way. I have to really know them before I can start writing about them. So they do spend a lot of time with me. And I just started, I've been working on a new project and sort of put it to the side for the past couple of months. But they've been starting to come back to me, and I was like, oh, they're here again.
They do leave sometimes.
It's a relief, but it's also kind of like, I have to go into this space again where I'm not going to be much use to anybody. I'll probably be really crabby and mean.
Are you a crabby, mean writer?
Well,
like during the first draft?
When I have to just stop doing it and get back into real life, and you don't feel like doing it. It's like,
Well, I know I was talking with a couple writer friends recently, and we were all complaining that it feels like it takes so long to get into that writing groove. And when you have a limited chunk of time, by the time you're in the groove, that chunk of time has ended. And then you're like, and then the next people you see, you probably will come across as snappish and
right. Because you're kind of coming out of one, you're in this sort of dazed state. You're coming out of that, going into, I remember when I wrote my first book, my son was in kindergarten. He had just started kindergarten. I had like 2.5 hours a day to write the book. So he would get on the bus to go to school. I would get inside and sit down, and then I'd have to go out at 11:30 and pick him up off the bus. And it was like, I've got to must transition. And it was so hot.
This is when I say thank you for full day kindergarten now, because this is my first year. My youngest is in kindergarten, and this is the first year I have all 3 of my children, and they're all gone from dropping them off at 8 till like picking them up at 2, except for on Wednesdays when they get picked up at noon. And like the idea of my brain not having to have little people and little voices for that chunk of time was like, wow.
And all of them on the same schedule.
I know
that is really.
I'm only going to have that for this year and next year, and then we start multi-schools again, and it's just going to get worse from there.
So just enjoy the next 2 years. Write everything you can.
Junior high and elementary, I don't know what I'm going to do then. Carpools.
Yeah, carpools. Get,
I don't know. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, you will. You will, but enjoy it while you can, because it's pretty good.
So Jane, you started writing in the aftermath in 2014, was it?
I did. I started in 2014. Yep.
So that's quite a long journey. Can you tell us a little bit of the highs and lows?
Why it takes me so long?
What's taking you so long, Jane?
I write longhand to begin with. Then I have to type it, which I avoided learning how to type when I was younger, because when I was going to school, I'm older than you guys are, but when I was going to school, the girls went to typing classes and the boys went to shop classes. And I didn't like that. I didn't think that was very fair. So I decided I just wasn't going to learn to type. And it was a principled stand, but it was probably the stupidest thing I've ever done. And I've never since really learned how to do it, but I type with 4 fingers now. So it's always a drag.
So when you were then did you just not take the class, or you sat in the class and went, I'm not going to?
Well, it was an elective, so I didn't have to take it, but everyone who took it learned how to type.
Yeah. They offered typing in my high school, and I didn't take it.
Yeah.
Because I remember telling my parents I will never need to know how to type.
Right.
and I thought I was going to be a writer, and I still thought.
How did you think the book was going to get written then?
I really
have someone who would do it for you.
I thought, yeah, because I think I thought I was going to hand like bounds of paper that are tied with twine to someone.
And they would unroll the scroll?
Yeah, and they would basically like unroll it or like brush the dust off and make it a book. Like that person would also do all of my editing. That. I know it doesn't exist. But then I also thought, I'm going to go to school for theater. I'm never going to need to know how to type.
That's true.
And I remember my dad saying, at one point in time, you're probably going to have to become a secretary. Because he was old fashioned. And I was like,
no, I'm never going to type now.
Never going to type now, ever, ever. And then when I did become an administrative assistant, I was terrible at it because I couldn't type. And I typed very slowly and I couldn't take like memos and things like that. I was like, oh no.
See, this is where I laugh because we didn't have the same dichotomy. Typing was a separate elective you could take at some point, but it wasn't paired against anything. The woodshop dichotomy happened back in junior high, and you could either do woodshop or drafting. And I'm like, I'm a klutz. I don't want to lose my fingers.
Right. Sure.
And then I got like a C- in drafting because I also can't draw a straight line. So I was going to be screwed either way. But I took typing in high school, and I wasn't even all that good at it. But it got in the proper formations, learned, and then I used it more, and I used it in law school. And then by the time I came out of law school, I typed faster than most of my secretaries did. So I gave up giving them dictation because I'm like, you don't type as fast as I do. Why would I do this extra step? I'm just going to do this myself.
I still have to look at the keyboard when I type.
Do you really?
Yes.
You too.
Like, yeah.
Horrible. It's the pain is real. It's really hard.
I know, and I always feel bad. Like I remember like work years, like somebody being like, "Oh, write this email for me," and I'm like, "Oh no, they're gonna know that I can't do this," and they're standing right there behind me. Yeah, I still have nightmares about that. I had one last night.
So Jane, okay, so you have to write it out longhand.
I write it out longhand, although I'm getting a little better about, starting at longhand and then working on the computer. But so that's good. But I like that whole brain to paper thing still. And then I have to go through and type it. So it takes me a while. And then, once I have a draft, it's all good because I like revision. I love revision. It's like putting puzzle pieces together, and I really enjoy that part of it. But it's just getting there, and it takes a while. And this book, I went through, I kind of hit a roadblock, and then I added a character, and so it took a little extra
Who
time.
did you add? Yeah.
I added Denise, the police detective. She was not in
She wasn't. I can't even imagine the story without her.
I know. Well, I needed her. I really needed her, and I was stuck with, there was just information that needed to get out, and I didn't have a way to get it out, and I needed somebody who could see the whole picture, or who would be tenacious enough to look at that whole picture.
Yeah.
And she's the linchpin. If you don't have
really is.
Yeah.
Really
and
is.
it's always fun to get an info dump when somebody's discovering something. Yeah. Which is, why crime books and mystery novels work, because there's somebody looking for the information we as the reader need.
Right. And I read a lot of mysteries. I read a lot of mysteries when I'm working on my own stuff because it's not really the same as what I'm doing, but then there always ends up being this sort of mystery aspect too. Something has to be figured out, which I guess is probably because I read so many of them. But I think it's fascinating.
So when you're, just one more quick question about the writing things out. When you go to the initial typing process, do you self-edit then, or do you just strictly?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do because what I've written is just so awful that I can't just keep going. So I will sort of edit, but I try to keep it to a minimum. I try not to do too much like content editing, yes, but structural editing, I just want to wait until I've got something on the page. Yeah.
Well, and everybody's process for that is really different, because I know some people are like, don't edit as you go, just get a first draft out. We talk about the vomit draft and then go back. And I don't think I've ever been able to do that for me, because part of my process always involves, especially when I get to a stopping point, because I'm a pantser, and I joke I'm a discovery flashlight writer. that in order to get back into a story, when I've set it aside, I always start by, like, I don't just start typing where I left off. I have to reread where I was.
Right.
And I almost always am fiddling with whatever I started reading.
Right.
And then start going from there. So everything, it's like this braid, and every part that goes forward, whatever was before that gets twisted a little bit.
Right.
So by the time I get to the end, everything's been fiddled with.
Right.
And that's probably why there's the most errors at the end of the book, because I haven't been fiddling with it as much.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. And I understand what you're saying. And I think that's part of the journey that we're on as pantser writers, is sort of figuring out what you're actually writing about. And it does have to kind of constantly get worked out.
It does, especially when you're like, when you discover characters or you add a character or a character that you thought was a throwaway, all of a sudden you're like, uh-oh, I switched to their point of view. Oops. Oh no, that's bad.
What happens now?
Oh. And then I'm like, I don't know what happens now. Yeah.
It's all a discovery. Which is what makes it really interesting for me, because I never know from one day to the next where it's going to really go until I'm sort of in the groove of it. And you sort of have an idea of where the characters are taking you. But until then.
But there's always that fear, I think, with pantsers, because we're all pantsers here, that you're going to get to that roadblock and then you're going to go, I really have nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what always makes me think, gosh, if I had an outline and I knew what would happen, would that be easier? But then I don't think I could ever even write an outline.
No, I can't either. What do you do when you get to that point? What do you do?
I just stop for a little bit.
Yeah.
I just like let the characters rest.
Mm-hmm.
And I just work on other stuff. Sometimes I accidentally start writing a new book.
Yep.
Or I do a lot of like personal essays and little like flash fiction pieces that just exist in a folder on my computer that will never go anywhere. But it's just like, oh, look, I can write. I wrote 700 words of this brilliant thing that's not going to go anywhere. And then sometimes just doing things like that, it like works itself back into my novel, like just like one line. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, that's something my main character would say. And then
opens that door for you.
It opens the door.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you just kind of take that time and let it percolate, which is nice too.
Yes. Like I've recently I took like about 2 months kind of off from my work in progress. I've fiddled with it a little, like say I poked at it with a stick. But like for the past like 2 weeks, I've been like, oh, I know what's happening. I think I know what's happening. Because I'm like almost at the end. And I was just like, I have an ending, but I don't know if it's a good ending. And I'm glad I took this time, because it was not a good ending. It was just an unrealistic / ambiguous ending that I was like,
that's not it.
No one's going to enjoy that, and neither do I. So I just waited, and now I think I have my ending.
Good.
Well, I think it really depends on, at least for me, where it is that I'm stuck, because there have been times where I've gotten stuck and I'm, say, 2/3 to 3/4 of the way, and I go, I know I need to get over this hump, but I don't know how to get over the hump. And I kind of know what it looks like on the other side, but I don't know how that happens. And then usually it just eventually comes to me, this is the way, and it ties things together in a way that I didn't see. And sometimes that just comes from rereading what I've done.
Yeah.
But it's also happened the other way, where the roadblock happens fairly early, and the reality is whatever I had to start wasn't a strong enough starting point to really have me go, I'm not really invested in these people or in this world. Yeah. And then I just set it aside. And if I decide to come back to it later, then maybe I will. But I know there was one that I started a year ago, Christmas, and got about 12,000 words and just went, not touching this.
Yeah. I have something I was playing with that I'm about 10,000 words on. And I'm like, is that a thing? I don't know.
Sometimes it's just, I don't have enough there yet to know. And it might be something that when it comes to me, it'll go back in and I can bring it all together. But right now that wasn't where I was. But I also know for me, sometimes it's an issue of outside circumstances. So I'm assuming if it takes you years to write a book, you were doing other things during this time other than just like, all I do is write a book.
Yeah. Does anybody do that? Does anybody have the time to all they do is write a book? I mean, we have to eat and sleep and keep ourselves sane and sometimes feed other people.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Life gets in the way sometimes. But I just sort of I do a combination of those things. I think I just will ask myself the question, what could happen next?
Mm-hmm.
And then just let it sit, you know, and take multiple dog walks and think about what these characters would do, and don't give the dogs too much attention while I'm out on the walks, but you know, see my characters, what they might do. And eventually I think brains are so interesting. I think brains are fascinating. If I knew enough about the way they work, it would be really dangerous. But
I was going to say maybe helpful. It would be helpful.
Maybe dangerous. But I just think sometimes if you let it go, sometimes the pieces all just start to slot into place in your mind, and you have it there all along, but you just don't know it, and there it is. I don't know.
Yeah, I think sometimes as writers, we're our own worst enemy because it gets in our head in a bad way. And then, you know, I know Allison and I have had this conversation where you start comparing your work to others, which you should never do. And then you start thinking about the industry as a whole, and what the industry wants at this moment in time, even though your book that you're writing right now wouldn't see the light of day probably for another couple years. And then we think, so am I doing something the industry wants in 2 years?
Let me get my crystal ball.
And then you just have to, like, I think, trust yourself as the writer to tell the story you want to tell.
Right.
And hope against hope that other people want to read it.
Right. Well, I heard, this was a number of years ago now, I think, after Gone Baby Gone came out, but before Mystic River. I went to hear Dennis Lehane speak at a library. And he was just talking about, I know, he was great. And he was talking about being broke in Florida. And he just started writing. And he just wrote a story because he had no television. He had no money. He couldn't go out and do anything. So he just started writing these stories to entertain himself. And I think ultimately that's what we all do. I mean, we, like you say, we can't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the industry is going to want. If we finish our stories, someone's going to read them or no one's going to read them. Who knows? But it's
really a crapshoot. It could be like the most perfect, incredible concept, beautifully written, genius book, and it sells 1,000 copies, if that. Or you never know what's going to kind of like hit in the zeitgeist, and everyone is all of a sudden talking about blah blah blah.
Right. So I think at some level you have to write to entertain yourself first and hope for the best. You know, who knows?
Okay, so Jane, you had longhand. You type it in, then you're editing.
Yep. How
do we get from 2014 to then?
Well, I finished it in 2019, so 5 years. It's a long time. It was a lot of working out. There were a lot of characters, and adding this character, pulling all the threads together and making it make sense actually took a long time once I had all the pieces. So that took a long time, and giving it to beta readers in between, and I wouldn't give the whole thing to them. I would give people pieces. What do you think? So getting stuff back and forth took some time. And then we were for the most of it, I wrote the most of it when we were in Switzerland between 2015 and 2018. And, I was just sort of traveling and doing stuff that I wanted to do in between too. So
no, you were in Switzerland. It would be hard pressed for me to write anything if I was in Switzerland, I think. Yeah. I would just be like, let's just be in Switzerland.
Yeah. And, every once in a while, you want to get out of Switzerland. Beautiful country, but you want to get out and see other things. So I was doing some traveling too. And I like to travel. I like to do some travel writing and photography and things like that. So, there were other things that were taking up my time, but
I'm just imagining you going all through Europe, having bakery samples and going, this is for research for my book. So
there was some of that. There was some of that went on. There was much baked goods being consumed while we were over there as well. But yeah, there's a lot going on. Life is just, and once you get in a groove too, you want to stick with it, but then sometimes you're not in it. So you need a break.
Is there a source of your spite against cupcakeries?
No, not really. I just
that was kind of I didn't overly believe that.
No. I love cupcakes and I love cake. I just really needed to sort of pick up on what was the trends that were happening during those times.
Totally fair, because I think that's
what she was doing
everywhere.
Right. And what she was doing was so much different, and what she ended up having to do because of circumstance. It was nothing against cupcakes, because I love cake. I love I love it. But
for those who haven't read, Jane starts out as basically a full service bakery doing all sorts of things, and then later on she's kind of limited to I'm working at a cupcakery, and she talks about it like it's this worst thing ever, and I'm going, cupcakes, this sounds like a sweet deal.
Yeah. Well, I think she's just not happy. She's just not happy being there. She's not happy with herself. She's not,
and be happy about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much the cupcakes as much as it was
everything else. And she's there. She's doing this because her father-in-law bailed her out, which was allegedly a good thing. But
she's
then
basically an indentured servant at that point.
Yeah, she really is. She's trying to work off the debt that she then owes him, and it just was not an enjoyable time. So I tried to make something as different as what she was doing before.
Yeah. Where she had this amazing creative control.
Yeah.
And she got to bake from her heart and discover things and do things.
Exactly.
I have to wonder, are you a big fan of the Great British Baking Show? Do you watch that?
I really don't. And I shouldn't even admit that, because I know it's really popular.
I'm not even a foodie, and I'm obsessed with it. I don't eat sweets, and my husband and I are obsessed with the Great British Baking Show. We scream at the TV like it's a sporting event.
Yeah, my husband loves it. I have so many friends who love it, and I shouldn't even admit this because they'll probably all shun me tomorrow. But I just don't watch it, and I don't know if it's because
it's probably because you do bake, so you're this is ridiculous.
I did it bakery, and I love everything British. I spent some time in England. I love their baked goods. I think they're wonderful. My grandmother was a British baker. I don't know why it just doesn't click for me. I think it's because I've done the work, and I just don't want to watch it as a competition. I don't know.
No, and I get that. And it's funny because I realized not that long ago that pretty much things that I have zero interest in real life, if British people are talking about, I want to watch it.
I love it.
Right.
I'll watch Top Gear. I don't like cars. I don't like baking. I mean, I like eating it, but I don't get to eat it. But I like watching Great British Baking.
I like watching it. But I will also say, I don't watch Dancing with the Stars.
I'm
a professional ballroom dancer. Right. And people were always like, how do you not watch it? And I'm like, I just can't. I just can't. Yeah. And it's nothing against the show. It's the same thing. I would see people dancing, somebody would show me clips, and I'm like, I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. But it's the competition thing that I never liked. I want it to be an art.
Right. Right. I think so. I think that's it. I think it's the competition aspect of it. And I did it as work, and I appreciate everything they're doing, but I just don't want to see it be a battle.
Yeah. I mean, if there was a show called The Great Novel WriteOff, and it was just a bunch of authors, locked in a castle.
No, because then it would turn into a murder mystery.
It would very quickly. We'd all kill each other.
Or everybody would just die of alcohol poisoning. After a little while, it would just be. It would go bad.
Yep.
I will say there's
so many ways it would just.
But I think the first half of it would be really boring, because it would just be people outlining or people longhand writing, and then everything would break into cliques of pantsers and plotters.
And we'd all be really supportive at the beginning of everybody, happy, and
so, lots of hugging. Yeah, especially if there was a reading segment where everybody had to read a little bit from their work, and then people would go oh, that was better than mine. Bitch.
Laurie Schoenfeld says, yes, I love seeing everyone's art individually, not as a competition.
Yes.
I agree, Laurie. Good point. I don't know. It's just something to watch and celebrate.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I just watched the baking show because I love it when they say the word soggy bottom.
My husband loves tray bake. That's
tray bake. Oh my gosh.
He's a chair.
We also like to this has just been incorporated in our everyday life now. We just describe flavors that don't go together, where you're like, what would make this cake better if it was lime, rose water, and cardamom?
So British.
It's so British. You know what this needs? a little bit of rose water, and
British.
I think my body wash was lime, rose water, and cardamom.
yeah.
It could be. Actually, it was Prosecco, but that's fine. I'm not even kidding.
That would be nice too.
Prosecco body wash.
That sounds delicious.
It's purple.
Effervescent and bubbly.
And bubbly and amazing.
So much.
Yeah.
So I love that we're going to end this on the words effervescent, bubbly, and amazing. Jane, you've been all of those things.
Oh, thank you.
And Allison, of course, you have as well. You are the Prosecco to my bourbon.
Oh,
Fair.
I love you too. You're wonderful.
We're like the odd couple, except we're both the odd one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'd have to like fight it out. Like, no, I'm the weird one. No, I'm the weird
We
one.
just go through periods of who's more manic on any given hour. Not even any given day.
Yeah,
just hour.
true.
Yeah.
Fact. That's a writing fact.
Mhm.
Yeah. Excellent.
Jane, thank you for being
Thank
here.
you very much for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
Everybody, check out Jane's book, In the Aftermath. It is it has a beautiful cover. Also, like whoever just designed the interior is lovely too. Just like
Lee Metz, she's a great book designer.
it's beautiful. It's
Thank you.
beautiful. Thank you, everybody at the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, which includes Roman Sierraton, our producer, Pam Stack, our executive producer. Stay tuned next week for the latest episode of Vox Feminist, where we have Amber Garza and her novel Where I Left Her. I believe that's what it's called. Where I Left Her. Where I Left Her. And Allison, your show, To the Moon, Allison, is when this week?
It's going to be the 19th. So next Tuesday, 11 a.m. my time. So that's what? 2 your time? 1 your time?
Yeah.
2, I think. 2 Eastern. And I'll have David R. Slayton, author of White Trash Warlock and Trailer Park Trickster. Don't say that 5 times fast.
I wouldn't be able to say it 1 time slow. So thank you for saying it nicely. And everybody who's watching live, thank you all. If you're listening to this on the audio or watching the replay, thank you all. And we'll see you